Maid Aqua here with another episode of Ethical Exchange. Let's take a second to think about your morning routine. You wake up, you get dressed, wash your face, perhaps you brew a hot cup of coffee. Well, have you ever stopped to think about the environmental impact of that liquid gold? Through this video, I hope to educate you on the dangers it puts our environment in and our animal friends in. And I'll give you some eco-friendly alternatives as well. Although coffee is a valued resource and key component to cultures all around the world, its true origins are hotly debated. Typically, the main conflict comes between the legends in Ethiopia and Yemen. Ethiopian history tells the story of a goat herder by the name of Kaldi. One day, while herding his goats in the Abyssinian highlands, Kaldi's goats began to jump around wildly, bleating loudly as they conducted a sort of energetic dance. When he found the source of this sudden enthusiasm, a cluster of shrubs spreading bright red berries, Kaldi decided to try them for himself. He too felt a sudden surge of energy and pocketed a handful of the berries to bring home to his wife. When she tried the mysterious discovery, she claimed that they were heaven-sent and insisted that Kaldi inform the monastery. The monastery initially believed the opposite of Kaldi's wife, with one monk referring to the coffee cherries as the devil's work before tossing them into the fire. A tantalizing aroma quickly began to rise from the roasting beans, intriguing the monks, who retrieved the smoldering beans, crushing them into a fine powder and brewing them with hot water, thus creating coffee as we know it today. When compared to Ethiopia's story, the coffee legends from Yemen are, quite frankly, a little dull. One such tale contains a surprising twist that actually attributes the origins of coffee back to Ethiopia. The Yemenite Sufi mystic Ghuthul Akbar Nuruddin Abul al-Hassan al-Sahil was traveling through Ethiopia when he encountered a group of peculiar birds feasting off the fruit of a boon plant. What made these birds so strange was how energetic they were acting. Exhausted from a long journey, the curious mystic tried the berries for himself and was invigorated. Although there are plenty other coffee legends we can discuss in this video, let's move on to the officially documented history of coffee and its consumption by the masses. Although we know it as the coffee bean, it's not actually a bean at all. The coffee plant, Coffea arabica, is a fruit tree that grows small red berry-like fruits called coffee cherries. Once these cherries are picked, the skin and pulp is removed, leaving the green seeds, which are eventually roasted. Now, you may be wondering why so much of the coffee cherry is removed, and the reason behind this process is that there is little to no nutritional value in a coffee cherry, and there's almost no fruit flesh on a coffee cherry, so it really just leaves the hard inner seed. While green coffee seeds can be ground, they are extremely tough. Roasting the coffee seeds makes them more brittle and much easier to crush up and brew. But let's backtrack for a moment. Before coffee was the morning beverage of choice, it was consumed in a variety of interesting forms. In the early days, the coffee cherry itself was mixed with animal fat to create a sort of protein-rich snack bar. Later on, the fermented pulp was used to create a concoction not too dissimilar to wine. It wasn't until the 13th century when the bean roasting process became commonplace. The history of coffee and its worldwide spread is a long-winded tale, so I'm going to run you through the highlights. The early 1600s, Badabudan, an Indian pilgrim, left Mecca with beans fastened to a strap around his abdomen, bringing coffee to Europe. This information is speculative. 1616. The first European-owned coffee estate was founded by the Dutch in Sri Lanka. 1644. Coffee arrives in the port of Marseille. 1645. Venice opens their first coffee house. 1650. England's first coffee house opened. 1669. Suleiman Aga, the ambassador to the court of King Louis XIV of France, brings coffee to Paris. 1671. France gets their first coffee shop in the form of a booth at the fair of Saint-Germain, run by an Armenian only known as Pascal. Many Parisian coffee shops were born after this event. 1773. Switching from tea to coffee became somewhat of a patriotic duty in America after the Boston Tea Party. 1864. John and Charles Arbuckle began selling coffee by the pound, blazing the trail for several well-known coffee producers. And finally, 1971. The first Starbucks in Seattle was opened after the awareness of specialty coffee began to grow. Now that you have a pretty solid idea of where coffee came from and its spread, let's talk about the effects of its production, both ethically and environmentally. Second only to oil, coffee is the most valuable legally traded commodity in the world. An estimated 2.25 billion cups of coffee are consumed on a daily basis worldwide. But all those beans have to come from somewhere. The coffee farming industry employs over 125 million people globally, and the value of the coffee industry is estimated at $90 million. The chain of coffee production is a long one, involving farmers, middlemen, roasters, exporters, importers, companies, coffee houses, and store shelves. Each of these steps towards a cup of joe incurs a price, and oftentimes corners are cut. The most common place in the coffee industry for cost cutting starts at the very beginning, with the farmer. 80% of global coffee production is done via small, family-owned farms. Crops from these farms are often harvested by hand, taking time and care to ensure that they are producing quality beans and adhering to ethical farming practices. High production farms, which account for the other 20% of coffee production, operate as highly commercialized facilities that mass produce low-grade coffee at a low price. Because these farms operate on such a high scale, their practices are not always sustainable. Coffee farming to begin with is not lucrative. In order to yield 10,000 pounds of coffee, you need to grow over 35,000 pounds of cherries. Farms that employ machines for harvesting waste on average 66% of the coffee picked. This is why the hand-picking method of coffee harvesting is preferred in many places, as it reduces the amount of waste at the added cost of needing to pay more farmers to do the work that many companies would prefer to use machines for. Being conscious about farmers' welfare is a key component to sustainability in the coffee industry, as the middlemen involved will often exploit the economic disparities between the United States and coffee-growing countries like Brazil, Vietnam, and Indonesia, inflating the prices and paying coffee farmers the lowest price possible. On average, coffee farmers will only make 10% of the retail price of their product. The competition among growers pushes this undercutting of pay even further, with price reductions that leave no safety margin in the case of supply drop, crop disease, or bad weather. Growers in impoverished areas will often live and work in poor conditions due to budget cuts. This is why a correctly implemented fair trade system is vital to the livelihood of farmers. When properly utilized, a fair trade system ensures that farmers will get the biggest share from their product. Modern methods of coffee growing have already had a huge impact on our environment. Since a higher output of crop is required to meet high demands, large coffee farms are getting rid of traditional growing methods altogether. In traditional growing fashion, coffee beans were grown under a large canopy of trees that provided a habitat for animals, insects, flora, and fauna. This production took place in delicate ecosystems in tropical and subtropical areas, where the trees and animals helped to prevent topsoil erosion and eliminate the need for fertilizers. The replacement coffee growing method, an intensive sun cultivation, grows coffee in plantations with the use of chemical fertilizers and unsustainable agricultural farming methods. The removal of trees, as well as the impact of the harsh sun, leads to a degrade in soil quality and high levels of erosion, ultimately resulting in the deforestation of 2.5 million acres of forest in Central America. Additionally, coffee processing plants often discharge waste into rivers, creating pollution and contamination issues that can cause eutrophication of the water system, a process by which a body of water becomes excessively enriched with minerals and nutrients. This, in turn, causes a dense growth of plant life in the water itself, depriving aquatic animals of oxygen, which ultimately leads to their death. According to sustainability expert Victoria Moore, over a 6-month period in 1988, it was estimated that processing 547,000 tons of coffee in America generated as much as 1.1 million tons of pulp and polluted 110,000 cubic meters of water each day. The active demand for cheap, fast, and reliable coffee consumption has been rapidly killing our forests and the habitats of people and animals. Big names in the coffee industry are well aware of the impact coffee has on our environment, but what are they doing to correct these issues? Starbucks launched their Coffee and Farmer Equity, also known as CAFE, practices in 2004. These ethical sourcing standards were developed in collaboration with Conservation International, employing 4 criteria to promote transparent, profitable, and sustainable growing practices, as well as protect the well-being of coffee farmers and their workers, families, and communities. Those 4 criteria include economic responsibility, social responsibility, environmental leadership, and quality checks. Thanks to the CAFE practices, Starbucks has maintained a 99% ethically sourced company since 2015. On an even larger scale, coffee companies that earn a fair trade certification ensure that the entirety of production of coffee, from cherry to mug, is done sustainably. Fair trade gives farmers stability by offering a fair trade minimum price that protects them from sudden price drops and allows farmers to negotiate better terms of trade and reach wider markets. Fair trade certified farmers also receive an extra sum of money paid on top of their selling price, known as a fair trade premium, that allows them to invest in business or community projects. The Rainforest Alliance is an initiative similar to fair trade, but focuses more on the environmental impact of coffee production. Coffee farms or groups of smallholder farmers that earn a Rainforest Alliance certification are audited annually against a rigorous standard of criteria designed to protect biodiversity, deliver financial benefits to farmers, and foster a culture of respect for workers and local communities. As far as solutions go, cutting out coffee cold turkey is always an option, but most of us aren't willing to give up the energizing effects of our daily cup of joe. I, for one, could never give up coffee. The best place to start when considering a more sustainable coffee experience is to look where your coffee's coming from. Keep an eye out for Fair Trade and Rainforest Alliance certification, and when in doubt, do a little research. You never know what kind of interesting information you could dig up. There are plenty wonderful coffee companies you can feel confident investing in, and I'll leave a bunch of them in the description below. As always, thank you for watching this episode of Ethical Exchange. We don't expect you to make the change to being 100% environmentally friendly overnight, but we do hope that through this series, we can help educate our viewers on how to take steps towards sustainability. What are some other topics we should cover on this series? Leave them in the comments below, and we'll see you on the next one.